Hello everyone, I'm Crime Whisper. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you drift off to sleep. So before you close your eyes tonight, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe now. Let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. The year was 2010 in a bustling city along China's southeastern coast. Like many cities across the nation, it was a place where expectations weighed heavily on every household, no matter a family's wealth, background, or status. One truth remained the same: the pursuit of excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded in a society as competitive as China's, where opportunities are scarce and the stakes are high. Parents often push their children to achieve greatness, believing that hard work and discipline will inevitably lead to success, but those same hopes can turn into unbearable pressure as each child grows up with the burden of knowing that their family's honor and future might rest entirely on their shoulders. For one student named Wu Shu, these pressures didn't just define his life, they consumed it. Wu was the embodiment of the model student. Teachers praised his brilliance, classmates admired his composure, and neighbors spoke of his devotion to his family, especially his mother. He wasn't just a top student, he was seen as the perfect son. But in 2010, tragedy struck. The Wu household. Wu's father passed away from liver cancer, leaving the 16-year-old alone with his grieving mother. The bond between them deepened, yet it also became strained under the weight of their shared loss. Over the next 5 years, the tension between love, expectation, and emotional exhaustion would reach a breaking point, ending in a crime so shocking that it would silence an entire community. Wu's early years followed a path familiar to many ambitious Chinese youths. Born in 1994, he was raised in a home built on discipline, ambition, and the belief that education was the gateway to a better life. His father, Wu Yan, worked tirelessly for the National Railway, while his mother, Zi Tian, was a respected middle school history teacher from a young age. Wu showed signs of exceptional intelligence. His parents spared no effort or expense in nurturing his talents. By middle school, he was enrolled at Fuzhou No. 1 Middle School, one of the most prestigious institutions in the province there. He consistently ranked among the top students, earning admiration from teachers and pride from his parents there. Faith in him was rewarded when Wu earned admission to Peking University, one of China's most elite institutions, often compared to Harvard in the United States. For the Wu family, this was the ultimate honor, proof that their sacrifices had not been in vain. But fate had other plans. In 2010, as Wu was preparing for his future, his father's sudden diagnosis of liver cancer shattered everything within months. His father was gone, the loss devastated. Wu, the man he had looked up to for strength and guidance, was no longer there, leaving behind an emptiness that nothing could fill. As time passed, Wu's inner world began to darken. He questioned the meaning of his achievements, the purpose of his life, and even the worth of his success. The pressure to remain the perfect son for his mother only deepened his despair. Both mother and son were grieving, but their grief took them down very different paths. In 2012, 2 years after his father's death, Wu entered his first year at Peking University. On the surface, he seemed to be thriving. His academic results remained stellar. He received multiple scholarships, and he was even honored with the prestigious O Student Order, distinction given only to the best of the best. But beneath that shining surface, something dark was beginning to grow. A rare distinction that placed him among the absolute top of his class. Teachers, classmates, and his family lauded his accomplishments. He had become the image of success. Yet for Wu, the prestige of being a standout student at such an elite university slowly turned oppressive. The weight of expectation pressed in from every side. He felt compelled to prove himself constantly, terrified that any slip would not only disappoint others, but also shatter the flawless identity he'd built. Wu wondered whether his successes were truly his own, or simply the product of everyone else's demands. Those doubts ate at him until they became unbearable. He began to spiral into suicidal thoughts, feeling isolated and unable to tell anyone what he was going through. After all, who would believe the model son and star student was struggling so deeply? Through it all, one memory kept surfacing. His father. It was July 10th, 2015. The summer heat in Fuzhou pressed on the city like a damp blanket inside the Wu apartment. The air hung heavy with humidity. Wu Shu sat at his desk, textbooks open, but the pages swam before his eyes. Time passed in a muffled haze until the gentle sound of wind chimes at the door signaled his mother's return. His heart kicked up a notch as he listened to the familiar footsteps and the click of the door closing when his mother stepped into the room with a weary smile. She noticed his books and asked, half teasing, half concerned, why he was still studying during summer break. Wu replied with a casual shrug and a faint smile, giving her the answer she expected. She accepted it and moved to take off her shoes at the entrance. What happened next was sudden and brutal. Wu rose quietly, slid a heavy dumbbell out from beneath his desk, and approached his mother from behind in an instant. He brought the weight down on her head. The first strike toppled her. The blows that followed were frenzied and relentless. By the time it ended, his mother lay motionless. The scene transformed from a home into something grotesque. Frozen for a moment, with the dumbbell still in his hands, Wu realized the enormity of what he'd done, but the shock gave way to calculation. He was, after all, one of the brightest students in the country. The thought of surrendering to the police never occurred to him. Instead, he set about hiding what he had done. Remarkably, his mother's body would remain undiscovered for 6 months, and Wu himself would disappear from view for 3 years. The question that haunted everyone who later learned the story was simple. How could a 21-year-old remain a step ahead of the authorities for so long? Wu's cleanup was methodical rather than chaotic. He wrapped his mother's body in layer after layer of bedsheets and plastic. Reports say as many as 7 layers in total. Between those layers, he placed bags of activated carbon to fight the smell of decomposition, a grim detail that revealed his cold, deliberate thinking. He then spent hours scrubbing the apartment, removing blood from floors and walls until the scene looked less like the aftermath of a murder and more like a scrubbed, ordinary living space in his own mind. Wu tried to rationalize the unthinkable. He told himself his mother had been broken by grief since his father's death and had lost the will to live. In his distorted reasoning, he believed he was somehow fulfilling her unspoken wish. He convinced himself that what he had done was tragically and grotesquely an act of mercy. Right thing, right. At least, that's what Wu tried to convince himself, but even after he scrubbed every drop of blood from the walls and floors, the thought wouldn't leave him. The apartment that had once been filled with laughter and comfort now felt heavy, suffocating. He couldn't stay there any longer. Still, before disappearing, Wu had one final mission: to make sure no one ever found out what he had done. From July 12th to July 23rd, 2013, Wu made several quiet trips in and out of the apartment. Each time, he returned carrying more supplies: packs of activated carbon, layers of plastic wrap, cleaning chemicals, and other materials to seal the crime scene even further. He also went a step beyond what most would imagine. He bought surveillance cameras and intruder alarms, setting them up around the apartment. The cameras weren't for protection, they were his early warning system. If anyone ever entered the apartment and stumbled upon the secret he'd buried, the footage would alert him. For Wu, these precautions marked the end of his cleanup and the beginning of his escape. He then checked into a nearby hotel, where he spent weeks in isolation there. His mind raced an endless loop of fear, calculation, and strategy. He knew that simply vanishing wasn't enough. People would start to notice his mother's disappearance. Friends, relatives, her co-workers at the school. So Wu began constructing an airtight lie, a story that would explain everything. And buy him time. From his hotel room, Wu sent text messages to family and friends. In them, He claimed that he and his mother had decided to move abroad so he could pursue further studies. The destination, the United States, where he said he'd been accepted into the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. A believable claim. Given his stellar academic record, the lie worked perfectly. Everyone who knew him thought it made sense. Of course Wu would get into MIT. Of course his devoted mother would go with him, and with that, suspicion vanished by placing himself and his mother thousands of miles away. Wu created a buffer of distance and plausibility that discouraged anyone from digging deeper. But Wu didn't stop there. He realized this story could also serve another purpose. Using the pretext of preparing for studies abroad, he began borrowing large sums from his mother's relatives, co-workers, and friends. He contacted banks, financial institutions, and even used both his and his mother's names to apply for loans and financial aid. Over time, Wu amassed 144 million yuan, roughly $200,000 USD. The money was funneled directly into his mother's account, an account he could easily access because the password was his own birth date, to make the deception airtight. Wu even forged a resignation letter in his mother's handwriting and mailed it to her school, making it appear that she had left her job willingly to accompany him abroad. Whether any of her colleagues found the situation suspicious is uncertain. Perhaps some did, but few dared to question her decision. After all, Zitian was a respected teacher, and if she'd chosen to leave, who were they to pry for the next 6 months? No one suspected a thing. Wu's story held firm. His mother's absence was chalked up to a new life overseas. In truth, Wu never set foot outside China. Instead, he relocated over 1,000 kilometers north, settling quietly in Henan province by January 2016, months after the murder. Wu had fully disappeared into his new world, in a dimly lit room inside a run-down apartment building. He sat hunched over a desk, crafting his new identity. He would now become Li Wei, a drifter, a man with no family, no past, and no ties. Every detail of this persona was carefully planned. The name, the background, the personality. He knew he needed to become someone forgettable, someone who could vanish into the crowd under this new alias. Li Wei set his sights on a local businessman named Li Chong, the owner of 2 small bakeries nearby. Through quiet observation, Wu learned that Li Chong was generous and soft-hearted, often lending money to anyone who seemed desperate enough. Seeing an opportunity, Wu approached him, pretending to be a struggling son, trying to care for an ailing mother. His voice was calm, his manner humble, his performance flawless. And just like that, the once celebrated scholar from Fuzhou, who had taken the life of the very woman who raised him, had reinvented himself as a wandering stranger ready to deceive again. Story was carefully crafted to evoke sympathy, and it worked. He told people he was drowning, in debt, and being mercilessly hounded by collectors. One of his targets, a man named Lu Sheng, was moved by Wu's supposed hardship and agreed to lend him money, but after receiving the cash, Wu vanished without a trace that night. Wu sat alone, staring at an ID card bearing the name Li Wei. He knew that if he wanted to keep running, he would soon need to discard it and create yet another identity. Over time, Wu became a master forger, not only crafting new identities for himself, but also selling fake IDs to others for profit. His efficiency and skill allowed him to move from one province to another, deceiving people wherever he went. But his next encounter would bring him closer to exposure than ever before. It was early February 2016, in the quiet suburban district of Pushan. A 49-year-old man had just finished dinner when his phone buzzed with a message from his nephew. "Hey uncle, my mom and I will be returning from Boston tomorrow. We'll arrive at Puxian railway station on February 6th. Could you pick us up?" The next morning, the man arrived at the station right on time, 11 a.m. sharp. He waited, scanning every face in the crowd, but hours passed, and there was still no sign of his nephew or his sister. Zitian, growing uneasy, he called other relatives, and together they searched the station. Still, the two were nowhere to be found. slept as night fell. The family decided to contact the police if they couldn't find them by morning on his way home. The uncle sent a few more messages to Wu Enzi, but none were answered then. By chance, he ran into one of Zai Tiang's former colleagues, a teacher from Fuju Education College. When he mentioned that he'd been waiting all day at the station for Wu and his sister, the teacher looked puzzled. She told him she'd seen Wu earlier that afternoon on campus, in Fuju. Words hit him like a cold shock. If Wu had been in Fuju, then why had he lied about traveling? What was he hiding? With mounting dread, the uncle reported both his sister and nephew missing days later. Still, with no sign of them, police decided to force entry into Zai Tiang's home on February 14, 2016. Officers from the Fuju Police Department stepped inside, and what they found was, chilling on Wu's bed, lay what appeared to be a human-shaped figure wrapped tightly in plastic. When unwrapped, it turned out to be nothing but a dummy. But beneath the bed, the real horror awaited. The body of Zai Tiang herself, carefully wrapped and hidden with the evidence now undeniable. The police named Wu their prime suspect, but he had already disappeared. Investigators later discovered that after fleeing Henan, Wu had traveled through several coastal cities, including Shanghai and Shenzhen. As his case gained national attention, he retreated inland, eventually settling in Chongqing. By then, he had created over 30 forged IDs, each with a new name, a new backstory, and a new set of victims to deceive for years. He managed to stay one step ahead of the law until one mistake brought it all crashing down. A mistake born out of love. In April 2019, Wu accompanied a female friend to the airport in Chongqing. As she prepared to fly to Wuhan, he wasn't planning to travel just to see her off. But as he entered the terminal, he had no idea that the sky surveillance system, an advanced network of cameras equipped with cutting-edge facial recognition, had already locked onto him within seconds. The system identified a 98% match with the wanted. Fugitive police were alerted immediately, within minutes. Wu was surrounded and arrested during interrogation. Wu didn't deny killing his mother, but he refused to explain why. When pressed on his motive and the events surrounding the murder, he dodged the questions, leaving investigators frustrated and unsettled. Still, his silence was enough. Authorities charged him with the murder of his mother, and he was ordered to stand trial on December 24, 2020. At the Fuju Intermediate People's Court, Wu faced justice in court. He spoke of the deep emotional scar left by his father's death, and even broke down in tears while recounting it. When asked about his mother, he described her only as a good woman, a good wife, and a good mother. But beneath those words lay years of deception, and the truth that had finally caught up to him was confession, or rather, his lack of denial became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Yet, despite the emotional performance he gave in court, his story still left gaping holes. When the prosecution presented evidence, the picture that emerged was one of long simmering resentment and greed after his father's death. Wu's relationship with his mother had deteriorated. She had grown frustrated with his lies, his mounting debts, and his endless schemes. On several occasions, she had confronted him, demanding that he take responsibility for his life. For Wu, who had lived years under a web of false identities and deceit, those confrontations became unbearable. According to the prosecution, an argument between mother and son in early February 2016 spiraled out of control. In a fit of rage, Wu strangled his mother to death inside their home. The chilling part was what he did afterward, wrapping her body in layers of plastic and hiding it beneath the bed where he continued to live for several days. The evidence unfolded: the forged the financial scams, and the carefully constructed lies. The courtroom fell silent. Even Wu's own defense had little to argue beyond emotional trauma and psychological instability. After hours of deliberation, the Fuju Intermediate People's Court delivered its verdict. Enzi was found guilty of the intentional homicide of his mother, Zai Tian. The judge condemned his actions as cold, calculated, and devoid of remorse, the court ruled that despite his apparent grief in court, Wu's years on the run, his web of false identities, and his attempts to deceive others proved premeditation beyond doubt, he was sentenced to death, with the execution to be carried out pending review by the Supreme People's Court. When the verdict was read, Wu stood motionless. There were no outbursts, no visible emotion, just a long, vacant stare at the floor for a man who had spent years building new names and new faces. It seemed the weight of finally being seen had crushed him completely outside the courthouse. Reporters gathered as the news broke across. National headlines: the story of the chameleon killer, a man who had changed his identity over 30 times to escape justice, became a cautionary tale about deception and the reach of modern surveillance in a cruel twist of irony. The very technology Wu had once used to fake his existence, counterfeit IDs, false records, digital manipulation, became the same technology that finally exposed him in the end. The Sky system didn't just recognize his face, it recognized the truth behind it. Wu began to spiral deeper into paranoia. He became distrustful of everyone around him, doubting his own sanity, and even contemplating ending his life by 2015. His mental state had completely deteriorated that same year. He noticed his mother's growing fascination with a television drama, Dream of the Red Chamber, and particularly with the lead actor, Leslie Chung, who, in real life, had died by suicide in his distorted state of mind. Wu convinced himself that his mother, too, wanted to end her suffering, to follow the same tragic path as her idol, or perhaps a character from the series. In his twisted reasoning, taking her life and then his own would be an act of mercy, a way to free her and reunite their family with his late father. By April 2015, Wu had already begun to meticulously plan the murder. 2 months later, his plan would become reality during the trial. Wu spoke of his father's death with deep emotion, claiming it left him paranoid and distrustful of his own relatives. He believed they had refused to help during his father's illness, and this resentment, he said, was the seed that grew into his later fraud, a form of revenge against those he believed had abandoned his family, despite his tears and erratic testimony. Wu never denied the charges, not the murder, not the elaborate fraud, and not the buying and selling of forged identity documents, while the prosecution demanded the harshest possible punishment. Wu's remaining relatives pleaded for leniency, arguing that he might have been suffering from a severe mental disorder, but the court was unconvinced. To the presiding judge, the case was clear. Wu had committed his crimes with full awareness of their consequences. His planning, his cover-up, and his calculated manipulation of others all pointed to deliberate intent. In a nation where justice is swift and exacting, the principle stood firm. An eye for an eye. On August 26, 2021, Wu Enzi was sentenced to death for the murder of his mother, along with 14 years in prison for fraud and identity theft. 2.5 years later, on January 31, 2024, at the age of 29, Wu was executed by lethal injection. The Fujiu People's Court confirmed that he was offered a final meeting with his relatives, an opportunity to say goodbye. He declined. Story 2. In the late 1970s, India stood at a crossroads, a nation caught between old traditions and a rapidly modernizing world. The streets of New Delhi pulsed with change, tension, and the restless energy of a society redefining itself. But beneath the optimism, the atmosphere was charged like a pressure cooker ready to burst. Just a few years earlier, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had declared a state of emergency, a 21-month period from 1975 to 1977 that plunged India into authoritarian rule. During that time, opposition leaders were jailed, the press was silenced, and the judiciary was pressured into submission. Civil liberties vanished overnight. Families lived in fear of the dreaded late-night knock, when police, armed with absolute power, could detain anyone deemed a threat to the state. Though Gandhi's government claimed the emergency was essential for restoring order and stability, Millions saw it as a betrayal of democracy. The scars it left behind would shape India's political and social landscape for decades. When the emergency finally lifted in 1977, and the Janata Party rose to power, it seemed like a new dawn, a time for healing and hope, but that hope was short-lived. The new government soon became mired in scandal and internal conflict, and their credibility would crumble further after a single horrific crime shocked the entire nation. It was a case so brutal, so unthinkably cruel, that it not only horrified the people of India, but also exposed the deep cracks in the system meant to protect them too. Men Kuljit Singh and Jasbir Singh, better known as Ranga and Billa, would become synonymous with pure evil in 1978. They kidnapped two innocent siblings, Geeta and Sanjay Chopra, in a crime that would haunt India's collective memory for generations. Sita and Sanjay were the heart of the Chopra family, bright, kind, and full of promise at just 16 years old. Geeta was a standout student at Jesus and Mary College, admired for her intelligence, creativity, and compassion. Her younger brother, Sanjay, only 14, attended modern school, where he was known for his sharp mind and warm personality. They were the kind of children every parent would be proud of, but on one fateful evening in 1978, their lives would cross paths with two of the most dangerous men in India, and the result would be a tragedy that changed the nation forever. They were the pride of the Chopra family, two bright, grounded children with the world ahead of them. Geeta, at 16, shone at Jesus and Mary College, with an easy warmth and creative spark that won her friends and teachers alike. Her 14-year-old brother, Sanjay, was a determined, sharp student at modern school. Admired for his focus and steady character, the Chopras lived in a quiet officers' enclave in New Delhi, a peaceful corner of the city where Captain Mohan Chopra, a career naval officer, raised his family with strict principles and a strong sense of duty alongside his wife. He instilled in Geeta and Sanjay's respect for education, responsibility, and country. The siblings were close collaborators on school projects, companions on family outings, and united by a shared love of music and Radio 1. Program they especially loved was Yuvani, on All India Radio, a youth-oriented show that tackled the questions and frustrations of a new generation. Their intelligence and poise had drawn the attention of the producers, and the siblings were invited to take part in an upcoming episode, an exciting opportunity that filled their parents with pride. On the evening of the 26th of August, 1978, the household buzzed with anticipation. Geeta and Sanjay left home around 6:15 p.m. For their radio appearance. The sky was overcast, and a light drizzle began to fall. But the plan was simple: attend the program, speak on air for roughly an hour and a half, and be picked up by their father at 9 o'clock p.m. as they walked toward the station. A car horn interrupted them. A man named Nanda offered them a lift, whether he was a family acquaintance or simply someone they trusted. The records don't make clear, only that, being sensible children, they apparently felt comfortable accepting the driver dropped them at Goldana roundabout at about 6:30 p.m., a busy, historic junction in the heart of the city. From there they continued on foot toward the radio building, chatting and sharing the easy companionship of siblings. That same evening, two men were driving the streets of New Delhi with a very different purpose. Kuljit Singh, known as Ranga, and Jasbir Singh, called Bill, were hardened offenders recently released from prison. Ranga had once driven trucks and later taxis. He'd graduated from petty theft to brazen crime, learning to exploit bribery, intimidation, and police gaps to stay free. Billa had a record for car theft and a reputation for violence. Together they made a dangerous pair, mobile, ruthless, and always looking for a high payoff jaban. The 26th of August, they were low on funds and desperate, watching the streets. They targeted the well-dressed teenagers who walked by the market, easy marks, who looked like the children of affluent families at about 6:35 p.m. A mustard-colored Fiat registration HRK 8930 slowed beside Gita and Sanjay. Inside were Ranga and Bila, seeing two seemingly unaccompanied, well-turned young people. The men decided they had found the perfect targets, children, who might bring a ransom large enough to change their fortunes. Walking alone in the dimming light, what began as an innocent evening stroll toward All India Radio soon turned into a nightmare that would haunt the nation for decades. As the mustard-colored Fiat rolled to a stop beside them, one of the men, Ranga, leaned out of the window with a friendly smile. Pretending to offer help, he introduced himself as someone sent by their father to pick them up, claiming Captain Chopra had asked him to drive the children to the station because of the worsening rain. The siblings hesitated for a moment. They exchanged uncertain glances, but the drizzle had started to intensify, and the street was becoming quieter. Trusting that their father might have indeed arranged the ride, they got into the car. It was a decision made out of innocence and practicality, but one that would tragically seal their fate once inside. The mood quickly shifted. The warm tone of the men's voices turned cold, and commanding. The siblings realized something was terribly wrong as the car sped past the familiar streets that led to the radio station. Gita tried to speak up, asking why they weren't turning toward All India Radio, but Ranga snapped back sharply, telling her to stay quiet. Bila, sitting in the passenger seat, turned around and gave the children a look that sent chills down their spines. The Fiat moved swiftly through the streets of New Delhi, heading away from the crowded areas and toward the city's outskirts. Back at the Chopra residence, Captain Chopra and his wife were preparing to pick up their children at 9 p.m. as planned. The drizzle had turned into steady rain, and the clock ticked past the hour. But Gita and Sanjay hadn't arrived, thinking they might have been delayed by the weather. Captain Chopra waited a little longer before finally deciding to drive toward the radio station himself. When he reached All India Radio, the staff informed him that the program had gone on as scheduled, but Gita and Sanjay never arrived. Panic began to set in. Captain Chopra immediately contacted friends, colleagues, and the police, fearing the worst. Meanwhile, Ranga and Bila had driven far from central Delhi. Their original plan was to kidnap the children, contact the parents, and demand a ransom. But as the hours passed and paranoia set in, their plan began to unravel. They feared that the siblings had already been reported missing, and police checkpoints would soon be set up. The criminals decided to take drastic, irreversible action, one that would shock the conscience of the entire nation. Ranga and Bila drove for nearly an hour, navigating the rain-slicked streets that led out of Delhi and into the quieter outskirts. The city lights faded behind them, swallowed by the darkness of the rural roads. Inside the car, the atmosphere was tense. Gita held Sanjay's hand tightly, whispering for him to stay calm. The siblings were terrified, but tried not to show it. When the car finally came to a stop in a secluded area near Dalakwan, the two men turned around, their expressions cold and predatory. Ranga barked at the children to stay quiet. Gita, mustering all her courage, demanded to know why they were being held. Bila responded with a cruel smirk, telling her they were worth more to him than she could imagine. The men tied the children's hands and drove again, this time to an isolated spot near the ridge area, a stretch of forested land on Delhi's outskirts. It was here, in the pitch darkness and eerie silence, that the true horror unfolded. What began as an attempt at ransom soon spiraled into senseless violence. Ranga and Bila's original plan was collapsing under fear and disorganization. They began arguing, each blaming the other for how things had gone wrong. Amid the chaos, their cruelty escalated. Gita, showing remarkable bravery for her age, tried to shield her brother and pleaded with them to let Sanjay go, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The men were beyond reason in an act of unthinkable brutality. Both children were assaulted and murdered. Ranga and Bila then dumped their bodies in a thick patch of undergrowth near the Delhi Ridge, attempting to conceal their crime before fleeing the scene in their Fiat, the forest already soaked with rain. would hold the siblings' remains for 2 harrowing days before the authorities discovered them back at the Chopra home. Captain Chopra was frantic. All of Delhi seemed to mobilize that night. Posters went up, radio announcements were made, and every police unit was alerted. It wasn't until August 28th, 2 days later, that a grim discovery was made. A local passerby reported a strange smell coming from the bushes near the ridge when officers arrived. They found the lifeless bodies of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra. The discovery sent shockwaves through the capital. 2 bright, promising children from a respected family, brutally killed for no reason other than greed and cruelty. News of the Chopra children murder case spread rapidly across India, sparking nationwide outrage. Newspapers called it one of the most horrifying crimes in the country's history. Vigils were held, protests erupted, and people demanded swift justice. The police launched one of the largest manhunts Delhi had ever seen. Ranga and Bila, now fugitives, fled across northern India, changing vehicles and appearances in an attempt to escape. But with their descriptions circulated nationwide and public fury at its peak, their freedom was short-lived. The discovery of Geeta and Sanjay's bodies on the morning of August 28, 1978, sent a wave of grief and fury across the nation. Newspapers ran front-page headlines, screaming of the Chopra children murder, and Delhi, usually bustling with the rhythm of everyday life, fell into collective mourning. Thousands of citizens gathered outside the Chopra residence to pay respects, holding candles, flowers, and banners demanding justice. Captain M.M. Chopra, a man known for his composure and discipline, was shattered. The sight of his children, once full of laughter and dreams, reduced to lifeless bodies, broke him in ways words could not describe. His wife, unable to bear the loss, collapsed in grief. What was meant to be a day of pride, their children speaking on national radio, had turned into a nightmare that would forever haunt Indian history. Meanwhile, the Delhi police, under immense public pressure, intensified their search for the killers. A nationwide manhunt was launched, involving multiple state police forces and border checkpoints. The mustard-colored Fiat with registration number HRK 8930 was the first solid clue. Witnesses had seen it near the roundabout where Geeta and Sanjay were last spotted. Using that lead, investigators traced the car to a known criminal network in Mumbai, one linked to Ranga and Bilabov. Men were already notorious to law enforcement. Ranga Singh and Koljit Singh, Bila, had long records of theft, assault, and robbery. After the murders, they fled Delhi and made their way to Mumbai, hoping to escape detection by blending into the city's underworld. They switched vehicles, changed clothes, and even shaved their beards. But with every passing day, the circle around them tightened. On September 6, 1978, their luck finally ran out. Acting on a tip, the Mumbai police spotted 2 suspicious men near Churchgate station. When officers approached them, the pair panicked and tried to flee. A brief chase ensued through the crowded streets until they were finally cornered and arrested at the police station. Their identities were confirmed. They were indeed Ranga and Bila. When confronted with evidence, including bloodstains in their car and personal items belonging to the Chopra siblings, both men broke down during interrogation. What followed were chilling confessions detailing the entire crime, how they abducted the children, their failed ransom plan, and the horrific events that followed. The news of their arrests spread like wildfire across India. Crowds gathered outside police stations demanding that they be handed over to the public. People screamed for immediate justice, and the media coverage turned them into symbols of everything wrong with the country's criminal justice system. The case proceeded rapidly through the courts. The evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, confessions, eyewitnesses, and forensic findings all pointed directly to Ranga and Bila. The trial became one of the most closely followed in India's legal history. In 1982, after years of hearings and appeals, both men were found guilty on multiple counts, including abduction, rape, and double murder, and were sentenced to death by hanging. Their execution was carried out on January 31st, 1982, in Tahor jail, bringing a grim end to one of India's darkest chapters. But the impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. The tragedy of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra sparked widespread debate about child safety, policing, and justice in India. It led to reforms in the way crimes against minors were investigated and brought public awareness to the dangers of abduction, lessons learned through unimaginable pain even decades later. The names of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra remain etched in the collective memory of India, not just as victims of a senseless crime, but as symbols of innocence lost and justice demanded. The legacy of the Chopra case. The aftermath of the Geeta and Sanjay Chopra murders was unlike anything India had seen before. It wasn't just a criminal case. It became a turning point in the nation's conscience. The public outrage was immense, spanning generations and classes. People who had once trusted the system now questioned its ability to protect the innocent. The tragedy forced the Indian government, the police, and the judiciary to confront uncomfortable truths about the flaws in law enforcement and the urgent need for reform in Delhi. The case triggered an immediate tightening of laws regarding kidnapping, child safety, and criminal rehabilitation. The government recognized that the casual release of hardened criminals like Ranga and Bila, both of whom had prior convictions, was a grave failure. New policies were drafted to improve background checks, parole systems, and interstate police coordination. Law enforcement agencies were instructed to maintain more detailed criminal databases and to share information across regions, something that had been lacking during the time of the Chopra murders in schools and communities. The tragedy also changed how parents and children interacted with the world. Campaigns on stranger danger and personal safety were introduced. Radio and television programs began addressing child protection directly, educating families on precautions that could save lives. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Geeta and Sanjay, who had gone out to record a program that empowered the youth, had become the very reason why future generations would grow up with greater awareness beyond legal reforms. The case also left an indelible mark on India's cultural memory. Movies, books, and television dramas were made, each exploring different facets of the crime: the innocence of the victims, the brutality of the criminals, and the emotional devastation of the parents. The nation's collective grief was transformed into a story that people retold, not just to mourn, but to remembering. 1984. The Indian Postal Department even issued a special stamp in memory of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra, a rare honor for civilians, especially children. The gesture symbolized the nation's acknowledgement of their loss and the profound impact their deaths had on society. Captain M.M. Chopra, though devastated, channeled his pain into purpose. He became a symbol of strength and justice, often speaking publicly about child safety and the need for vigilance. His dignity, even in grief, inspired many, though the loss of his children was an unhealable wound. His resilience helped push for systemic change. Case also inspired the creation of awards in the Chopra children's name, the Sanjay Chopra Award and the Geeta Chopra Award, part of India's National Bravery Awards program. These honors are presented every year to young heroes who display extraordinary courage in the face of danger. Through these awards, the siblings' legacy continues to live on, turning tragedy into inspiration today. Decades later, the Chopra case remains one of the most haunting reminders of the thin line between innocence and cruelty. It exposed the deep cracks in the system, but also ignited a movement toward justice and reform. The names Geeta and Sanjay Chopra endure not merely as victims of a terrible crime, but as symbols of a nation's awakening, nation that vowed never to let such a tragedy be forgotten. Time has moved forward, but the shadows of that August evening in 1978 still linger. The rain that fell on New Delhi that night has long since dried. Yet for many, it feels as if the droplets never stopped. Each one a quiet reminder of two young souls taken far too soon. Geeta and Sanjay Chopra were more than victims of a crime. They were symbols of everything pure and hopeful about youth. Their laughter, their curiosity, their dreams of a brighter tomorrow. Their story is not one that fades with history. It remains etched in the conscience of a nation. A painful lesson about how darkness can strike even in moments of innocence. For every parent who holds their child's hand a little tighter, for every teacher who reminds students to be cautious, for every police officer who swears an oath to protect their names, live on the rain-washed streets of Delhi, have changed. The city has grown, buildings have risen, and the sounds of progress echo where once grief and outrage filled the air. Yet somewhere, in the collective heart of India, there is still a silence that belongs to Geeta and Sanjay, a silence that speaks louder than words, of love unfulfilled, of future stolen, but also of resilience, remembrance, and the enduring belief in justice. Their legacy, carried through the awards in their name, continues to honor the courage of India's children, those who stand up to danger, who protect others, and who remind the world that bravery and innocence can coexist. And so, the story of the Chopra siblings is not just one of tragedy. It is a testament to the power of remembrance, that even in loss a nation can find purpose. Even in grief, a family can inspire strength. And even in death, two young hearts can continue to shape generations. For as long as India values justice, innocence, and the courage to hope, Geeta and Sanjay Chopra will never be forgotten. They were just two children, full of promise, laughter, and life. On August 26, 1978, Geeta and Sanjay Chopra left their home in Delhi with dreams of being heard, of sharing their voices with a nation they never returned. What happened that evening would scar India's collective memory forever. Two hardened criminals, Ranga and Bila, turned a moment of innocence into one of unimaginable horror. The city and the country would never be the same again as the details of their abduction and murder came to light. Outrage swept through the nation. People filled the streets demanding justice, not just for Geeta and Sanjay, but for every child whose safety had been stolen by fear. The case revealed the cracks in India's law enforcement and judicial systems, forcing the government to confront the consequences of corruption and neglect. And when justice finally came, it came with the full weight of a grieving nation. In 1982, Ranga and Bila were executed, their names forever synonymous with cruelty. But the story did not end with vengeance. It continued in remembrance in the years that followed. The National Bravery Awards introduced the Sanjay Chopra Award and the Geeta Chopra Award, honors given to young heroes who display extraordinary courage in the face of danger each year. As their names are spoken on Republic Day, it is not just an award being given. It is a promise that their sacrifice will never be forgotten, even decades later. The story of the Chopra siblings remains a haunting reminder of innocence, lost in justice founded, is a story of a nation that mourned, a family that endured, and a memory that continues to live, not in tragedy, but in courage, because, in remembering Geeta and Sanjay, India remembers itself, its pain, its hope, and its unbreakable will to protect the light of its children. The legacy of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra continues to inspire generations across India. Their story, born from tragedy, has become a symbol of innocence, bravery, and the enduring fight for justice. Each year, when the National Bravery Awards are presented, their names echo through the hall as a reminder of what the nation lost and what it must always protect. That points. Awards given in their honor are not just medals of courage. They are living tributes to two young souls whose strength, in the face of terror, awakened the conscience of a country even decades later. The mention of the Chopra siblings evokes both grief and admiration, a poignant reflection of a nation that refused to forget. Through them, India learned that courage does not always come from age or experience. Sometimes, it is found in the pure hearts of children who never stopped believing in the good of the world. Even in its darkest hour, Their names became more than part of a tragic headline. They became woven into the moral fabric of India's collective memory. Schools, institutions, and families would recount their story as both a cautionary tale and a lesson in resilience for many parents. The Chopra case served as a painful reminder of the importance of vigilance. For children, it became a story of innocence lost too soon, yet amidst the sorrow, the legacy of Geeta and Sanjay endured as a beacon of moral courage over the years. The government's decision to name two of the National Bravery Awards after them, the Sanjay Chopra Award for boys and the Geeta Chopra Award for girls, ensured that their bravery would live on through others. Each young recipient who steps forward to accept these medals carries with them a fragment of that legacy, a promise that the values the Chopras embodied, courage, compassion, and integrity, will never fade away. Even today, long after that fateful August night in 1978, the Chopra siblings' story continues to move hearts across the nation. Their photographs, preserved in black and white, still radiate life, two bright faces frozen in time, symbols of hope and youth, though their voices were silenced. Their story continues to speak volumes. It tells us that evil may win moments, but goodness, pure and unyielding, stands the test of time. And as generations pass, Geeta and Sanjay remain not merely victims of a horrific crime, but eternal symbols of bravery, innocence, and the undying pursuit of justice. The arrest and conviction of Ranga and Bila did not bring the peace the Chopra family had once known for Captain M.N. Chopra and his wife. Life after August 1978 became a series of endless memories. Every corner of their home, every unopened notebook, every photograph that once symbolized joy now felt like a wound that refused to heal. In the weeks following the children's funerals, New Delhi was in mourning. The city that had once moved to the rhythm of honking cars and bustling markets now seemed quieter. As if burdened by collective guilt, newspaper headlines screamed for justice, and radio programs, once filled with songs and laughter, broadcast endless debates about the nation's moral decline. For many, the murder of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra wasn't just another crime, it was a wake-up call. The sheer brutality of what had happened to two innocent children from a respectable family shattered the illusion of safety that middle-class India had long held on to. Parents grew fearful. Schools introduced new safety protocols, and taxi drivers found themselves under scrutiny. But behind the national outrage, the police investigation had become a race against time. The Delhi police faced immense public pressure to deliver results. In a country where faith in the justice system was fragile, failure was not an option. As details of the case emerged, it became evident that the kidnappers' initial plan had gone horribly wrong. Ranga and Bila had originally targeted the children of a wealthy industrialist, but after spotting Geeta and Sanjay near the roundabout, they impulsively changed their plan to them. The siblings appeared well-dressed, educated, and from an affluent family, the perfect targets for ransom. After luring them into the mustard-colored Fiat, the two men drove aimlessly through the dimly lit streets of Delhi. When the children realized something was wrong and attempted to resist, the situation escalated into violence. Geeta and Sanjay's desperate attempts to reason with their captors were met with cruelty beyond comprehension. Later that night, when the children failed to return home, Captain Chopra contacted the All India radio office. To his horror, he learned that Geeta and Sanjay had never arrived for the program. Within hours, a frantic search began. Calls were made to friends, relatives, and police stations across the city. By dawn, flyers with their photographs began circulating in nearby districts. As the hours turned into days, the hope of finding the siblings alive began to fade. It wasn't until a group of villagers in Haryana stumbled upon an abandoned car that the truth began to surface. Inside the vehicle were bloodstains, a few items of clothing, and two school identity cards bearing the names Geeta Chopra and Sanjay Chopra. Just days later, in a desolate field near Delhi, Their bodies were found. Both had been brutally murdered. The news sent shockwaves throughout the nation. People took to the streets demanding justice, their chants echoing through the corridors of power in Parliament. Questions were raised about the government's failure to ensure safety for its citizens for the Janata Party, which had only recently come into power. The case was politically devastating. It became a symbol of the government's incompetence and loss of control within days. The police identified two prime suspects, Kuljit Singh Ranga and Jasbir Singh Billa. Both men had extensive criminal records and were known to frequent the darker corners of Delhi's underworld after a manhunt spanning several states. The fugitives were finally captured in Madras, now Chennai, when brought back to Delhi. The two men showed no remorse in their confessions. They spoke coldly about the kidnapping, as though it had been just another job gone wrong. Their words chilled even the most seasoned investigators as the case went to trial. The courtroom was packed with journalists, families, and ordinary citizens desperate to witness justice. The proceedings were intense, and emotionally charged evidence presented by the prosecution painted a grim picture: blood-stained clothes, fingerprints, and the recovered car, all linked directly to the two accused. When the verdict was finally read, a hush fell over the courtroom. Both Ranga and Billa were found guilty of kidnapping, rape, and murder, and were sentenced to death. The decision was met with applause, tears, and a sense of grim satisfaction. For once, the people felt that justice had triumphed. But even as they awaited execution, Ranga and Billa became symbols in a broader national conversation about morality, punishment, and reform. Human rights activists, including some international groups, appealed to the government to commute their death sentence, arguing that every person deserved a chance at redemption. Yet the public's anger was unrelenting. The crime had been too heinous, too cruel to forgive. When their appeals were rejected, both men were executed by hanging in Delhi's Tihar jail in 1982. The day of the execution drew crowds outside the prison gates. Some prayed, others cheered, but inside the Chopra household, there was no celebration, only quiet sorrow. Justice may have been served, but peace remained elusive. In the years that followed, the Chopra siblings became symbols of courage, and innocence lost their memory, gave birth to a movement. The National Bravery Awards, honoring young Indians who displayed exceptional valor every year. On India's Republic Day, children from across the country walk in the parade wearing medals that bear the name Geeta and Sanjay Chopra Award. It is one of the most prestigious honors a child in India can receive for Captain Chopra. These awards were more than a tribute. They were a way of keeping his children's legacy alive, ensuring that their deaths were not in vain. They are gone, he once said in an interview, but through every brave child who carries their name, they continue to live. The Chopra case also changed the way law enforcement in India handled kidnapping and child safety. New procedures were introduced, and radio programs began implementing strict identification protocols for guests. Parents across the country became more cautious, teaching their children to be wary of strangers and always stay in contact. Yet, despite all these reforms, the pain endured by the Chopra family could never be erased. Mrs. Chopra's health deteriorated over the years, and Captain Chopra devoted the rest of his life to social causes and youth welfare. He continued to speak publicly about the importance of courage and integrity, using his children's memory as a beacon of hope for others. Over 4 decades later, the case still lingers in the collective memory of India. It is often cited in legal discussions, documentaries, and books as one of the defining moments in the nation's criminal history, a turning point that reshaped public attitudes toward justice. Even now, when people speak of Delhi in the late 1970s, the names Ranga and Billa evoke a mixture of fear and disgust, while Geeta and Sanjay represent the light that refused to be extinguished. The story reminds us that evil can appear in ordinary forms to men in a car, a simple act of misplaced trust, but it also reminds us that innocence, though fragile, can leave an impact strong enough to outlast generations. Their courage was not in fighting back. They never had the chance. It was in their purity, in the way they lived, in the example they left behind for an entire nation to follow when the Republic Day parade passes through Rajpath each year, and the young bravery awardees march proudly before the tricolor flag. One can almost imagine Gita and Sanjay among them walking hand in hand, smiling beneath the winter sun, their spirits forever free. In the weeks that followed the execution of Ranga and Bila, Delhi seemed to breathe again, but it was a shallow, uneasy breath. The case had come to symbolize more than the brutal murder of 2 children. It represented the fragility of innocence in a rapidly changing India. Newspapers declared justice had been done, yet editorials reflected an uncomfortable truth that such horrors were a symptom of something much darker beneath the surface of society. For a city known for its diplomatic charm, its colonial architecture, and its quiet neighborhoods, the crime was unlike anything people had witnessed before it, forced Delhi to look inward to confront the ugly realities that hid behind the polished facades of progress and modernity. Delhi police were relentless in their pursuit of justice, partly out of moral duty, but also because of the immense national outrage. Public confidence was crumbling, and the authorities knew failure was not an option when the mustard-colored Fiat was discovered abandoned in Haryana. The clues were scarce, yet every detail mattered: tire tracks, fingerprints, strands of fabric, and the scattered items left inside. Investigators meticulously pieced together the final hours of the siblings' lives. They learned that Gita and Sanjay had been taken to an isolated area near the outskirts of Delhi, where the attacker's car had broken down. Forensic experts matched blood samples found in the car to the children, confirming their fate long before the bodies were officially discovered. Witness statements placed a similar car at several checkpoints along the Delhi-Haryana border. Narrowing the suspects' movements, the police issued alerts across northern India, and within weeks, the hunt for the killers intensified into a nationwide operation. The break came when 2 men fitting the suspects' descriptions were spotted boarding a train in Madras, acting on a hunch. The police coordinated with Tamil Nadu officers, who arrested them in a crowded station. When interrogated, the men identified themselves as Kuljit Singh alias Ranga and Jaspir Singh alias Bila. Both were small-time criminals from Punjab, with prior records for robbery and assault, but this time, their crime had crossed into something far more sinister. In custody, their demeanor was chilling. Ranga remained largely silent, while Bila displayed an eerie mix of arrogance and detachment. They didn't deny being in Delhi, but their accounts shifted constantly. Eventually, confronted with the mounting evidence, both confessed, though their confessions contradicted each other in key details, each man blaming the other for the killings. Their statements revealed a disturbing lack of empathy. According to the police, Ranga had told investigators, "We did not mean to kill them, things got out of hand." But the brutality of the crime told a different story. The trial began in early 1979 at the Delhi Sessions Court. It attracted enormous media attention. Reporters filled every available seat. Sketch artists documented the faces of the accused, and citizens lined the streets outside just to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. The prosecution, led by the state's top advocates, presented an overwhelming case. The evidence was damning: fingerprints, bloodstains, and witness testimonies all pointed toward Ranga and Bila's guilt. The children's identity cards and school badges were found in the car. Fibers from the victims' clothing matched materials recovered from the suspects' possessions. Throughout the hearings, the courtroom atmosphere was tense. Captain and Mrs. Chopra attended every session, sitting quietly in the front row, their grief etched deep into their faces. For them, it wasn't about vengeance, it was about closure, about ensuring that no other family would endure the same fate. When the defense attempted to argue that the confessions had been coerced, the judge rejected the claim, citing the consistency of physical evidence. After months of arguments, The verdict was clear. Both men were found guilty on all counts: kidnapping, rape, and murder, and sentenced to death by hanging outside the courthouse. People celebrated, crowds chanted slogans praising the judiciary and condemning the killers for the first time in years. Citizens felt that the system had stood firm, but justice, as Captain Chopra would later reflect, is never simple. It may punish the guilty, but it cannot heal what's been broken. The final days of Ranga and Bilan, the years between their conviction and execution. Ranga and Bila's case moved through the Indian legal system, climbing from the High Court to the Supreme Court, and eventually reaching the President of India through mercy petitions. Every request for clemency was denied as their final days approached. Journalists reported conflicting accounts of their behavior in Tahor jail. Some claimed they had become introspective. Even remorseful others described them as cold and detached, unrepentant until the end on the morning of their execution. January 31st, 1982. The prison bell tolled before dawn. The hangman performed his grim duty as officials and witnesses stood in solemn silence outside the gates. Hundreds had gathered, not to mourn, but to bear witness. Some prayed. Others wept. The news spread across India. Within hours the story dominated radio broadcasts, and newspapers printed special editions: Ranga and Bila hanged. Read the bold headline for many. It was the closure they had long awaited. But inside the Chopra home, there were no celebrations. Mrs. Chopra reportedly lit a small diya before her children's photograph, whispering a prayer, not for revenge, but for peace. Nothing will bring them back, she told a reporter, but maybe, now, their souls can rest. The legacy in the years that followed. The Chopra case became more than a tragedy. It became a movement. The Indian Council for Child Welfare, recognizing the profound impact of the sibling story, instituted 2 awards in their honor: the Sanjay Chopra Award and the Geeta Chopra Award. These awards, presented annually to children who display acts of exceptional bravery, became a cornerstone of India's Republic Day celebrations each year. As the young recipients march proudly down Kartivya path before the president, they carry forward the memory of 2 children who never got to grow up, but whose courage continues to inspire. Countless others. One such recipient, years later, would say in her acceptance speech, "I didn't know Geeta and Sanjay personally, but I feel like I do. Their courage is part of us now. Every child who chooses to be brave when it matters most." Captain Chopra devoted the remainder of his life to youth welfare and public safety advocacy. He became a frequent guest at schools and national forums, speaking about the importance of vigilance, moral strength, and resilience. His words, always calm and steady, carried the weight of lived tragedy, but also the light of enduring hope. In interviews, he often said that the real tribute to his children wasn't the punishment of their killers. It was in the courage of those who would one day save lives because they chose to be bravest. The decades passed. The story of Ranga and Bila faded from newspaper columns, but never from collective consciousness. It continued to be referenced in legal studies, police academies, and discussions about criminal justice, and psychological impact. Sociologists and criminologists later described the Chopra case as a defining moment in Indian crime history. It exposed how unprepared law enforcement agencies were for handling abductions in an urban setting. In the aftermath, Delhi police established new divisions dedicated to missing persons and child safety, changes that would later save many lives. Culturally, the case became a cautionary tale passed from one generation to the next. Parents began teaching their children about personal safety, about being cautious around strangers, about memorizing emergency numbers, practices that were unheard of before. 1978, even in literature and cinema, the echoes of the tragedy can be found. Numerous TV programs and documentaries have revisited the case, each time uncovering new layers of emotion and moral complexity. The story continues to haunt and teach in equal measure, the memory that never fades today. More than 4 decades later, a quiet memorial stands in the Chopra family home, to photographs, side by side, surrounded by garlands. Geeta, smiling with her short hair neatly tied back, and Sanjay, his eyes bright with youthful confidence, their faces remain frozen in innocence, untouched by time. Visitors, who come to pay respects, often describe a stillness in that room, the kind that speaks louder than any words could. Captain Chopra passed away years later, but until his final days, he kept his children's medals and awards polished, their memories vivid in his personal diary, discovered after his death. One line stood out among many: "I could not save them, but perhaps, through them, I can save others," and in a way, he did. The legacy of Geeta and Sanjay continues, not through sorrow, but through courage, in every child who dares to stand up for what's right, in every act of compassion that defies fear, and in every life saved because someone remembered their story. The murder of two young siblings in 1978 shook India to its core, but their memory became the seed of something powerful, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of human cruelty, the light of innocence can endure. When the Republic Day parade rolls through Delhi each January, the sight of the young bravery awardees marching proudly before the nation serves as a silent salute to them. Two children who left far too soon, but whose names, forever engraved in the heart of India, continue to whisper courage into every generation that follows the echoes of time. More than 4 decades have passed since that tragic August evening, yet the story of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra continues to cast a long shadow across India's social and moral landscape. Time has dulled many memories from the 1970s, but not this one. Every few years, the case resurfaces in documentaries, school lessons, or anniversary articles, reminding the public of a pain that once united an entire nation in grief and outrage for those who lived through that era. The shock remains unforgettable. In 1978, India was still a young democracy, its people hopeful, its youth brimming with optimism. The idea that 2 children from a respected family could be abducted and killed so mercilessly in the heart of the capital city shattered that optimism. It forced citizens and lawmakers alike to confront the inadequacies of a justice system that was too often reactive instead of preventive. The aftermath of the case led to widespread changes in how law enforcement approached crime involving children. For the first time, Delhi police introduced dedicated cells for missing persons and child protection, a move that would later become a national standard. The tragedy also influenced several later initiatives under the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, decades before modern legislation like the POCSO Act. Protection of children from sexual offenses would not be an exaggeration to say that Geeta and loss became the emotional foundation upon which India's child safety awareness was built. Parents began to talk more openly about safety with their children. Schools started holding awareness sessions about dealing with strangers, emergency contact systems, and the importance of vigilance. These were cultural shifts, slow, subtle, but profound. The siblings, in their absence, continued to change how the nation thought and acted. A nation's reflection. In 2003, All India Radio, the very institution where the Chopra siblings were scheduled to appear on that fateful day, aired a special commemorative broadcast titled Voices Unheard, the story of Geeta and Sanjay. It was a moving reflection, told through the voices of radio veterans who had been working at the station in 1978. Many of them remembered how the studio's usual hum of energy fell silent that night. When the children failed, 2 arrival listeners across the country tuned in, some weeping quietly, others simply reflecting on how far India had come and how much innocence had been lost. One of the producers, during that broadcast, said something that struck a chord with millions. They never made it to the studio, but their story became one of the most powerful broadcasts India ever received. A message not through microphones, but through the collective conscience of a nation. The broadcast was followed by letters, thousands of them, sent from across India, from teachers, Students, soldiers, and even inmates, some shared personal grief. Others offered pledges to protect the next generation. It was proof that, even after so many years, Geeta and Sanjay's story still had the power to move hearts and ignite compassion. Awards that carry their name, the Geeta Chopra Award and the Sanjay Chopra Award, remain among the highest honors a young Indian can receive. Each year, during the Republic Day celebrations, a handful of children walk onto the national stage to accept their medals from the President of India. These children, often from humble backgrounds, have performed acts of remarkable courage, saving people from drowning, stopping crimes, protecting others, despite grave personal danger. When their names are announced, the hall fills with applause, yet behind every cheer lies a silent acknowledgement. These awards exist because two brave children once faced unimaginable horror and did not survive it. Over the decades, hundreds of awardees have carried the Chopra siblings' legacy forward. Many recipients have gone on to serve as officers, doctors, social workers, and even educators. Some have publicly expressed that receiving an award bearing the Chopra's names inspired them to dedicate their lives to helping others in this way. Geeta and Sanjay live on, not as mere memories of tragedy, but as symbols of moral strength, a quiet reminder that courage can rise even from the depths of loss. Modern parallels and lessons learned when modern India faces new crimes against children, whether in Delhi, Mumbai, or beyond. News anchors, journalists, and activists often draw comparisons to the Chopra case. It has become a reference point, a moral touchstone against which the nation's conscience is measured. Legal experts still discuss the efficiency of the investigation, noting that the 1978 case marked one of the earliest examples of public pressure accelerating due judicial process. The swift arrest, trial, and conviction, all within a few years, showed that justice could be both firm and fair. But it also sparked larger debates about rehabilitation versus punishment, about whether executions truly prevent crime, and about the need for systemic reform rather than reactive outrage. Psychologists studying the case often note that Ranga and Billa's descent into crime reflected broader social failures, poverty, lack of education, and an unchecked criminal network that thrived on exploitation. Yet, even in understanding the causes, the public never excused their actions. The brutality of what they did had crossed a moral line, too deep to ever be rationalized. The case, in hindsight, became a study in contrast between innocence and corruption, between duty and decay, between what India aspired to be and what it feared becoming. How Delhi remembers in Delhi today. The officers' enclave in Dalakwan, where the Chopra family once lived, has changed. The old houses have been renovated, new families have moved in, and the world outside has evolved with gleaming highways and urban expansion. Yet locals say that even now, old-timers remember the Chopras. Some still point to the house and whisper stories about the two brave children on certain anniversaries. Candles are lit quietly near the local park, sometimes by children who learned about the story from their parents or teachers. There are no grand ceremonies, no media fanfare, just quiet remembrance. The air in that neighborhood carries a certain reverence, as if the city itself knows that part of its innocence was lost there, never to return. A story that refuses to fade. Endurance of the Chopra case lies in its emotional universality. It isn't just about a crime, it's about what the crime revealed. It exposed the vulnerability of youth, the frailty of justice, and the depth of a parent's grief, but it also illuminated something larger: humanity's capacity to rebuild meaning from tragedy. Each retelling of the story brings with it a sense of moral responsibility. Teachers tell it to students not to frighten them, but to inspire empathy and awareness. Documentaries recount it to show how collective outrage can lead to real change, and social workers cite it as proof that awareness and action must go hand in hand, even among India's modern generation, raised in the era of social media and instant news. The Chopra siblings' names still appear in discussions about justice and bravery. Their story, despite being rooted in another time, feels eerily timeless because it touches on truths that remain relevant: innocence, danger, loss, and the courage to face darkness. The Chopra family's enduring grace after the tragedy. Captain and Mrs. Chopra remained deeply private, rarely appearing in public except for national events honoring their children. They turned their pain into purpose. Both worked with welfare organizations, advocating for children's rights and public awareness campaigns about safety. Captain Chopra, until his death, carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had endured the unendurable. When asked once by a journalist if he ever forgave the killers, he paused for a long moment before answering softly, "Forgiveness is not mine to give, but I can choose not to let hatred destroy what my children stood for." That answer reflected the extraordinary grace that defined the Chopra family. Their tragedy had not made them bitter. It had made them resolute. The meaning of courage. If there's one enduring message that Geeta and Sanjay's story leaves behind, it is that courage is not confined by age or circumstance. The two siblings never had the chance to display heroism in the conventional sense. They were victims of a senseless act, yet their innocence and integrity have become symbols of a deeper kind of bravery, the moral courage to believe in goodness even when confronted by evil. That is why, every Republic Day, when young heroes march through Delhi carrying the medals named after them, their story is told once more, and as the applause echoes through the parade ground, it becomes clear that while tragedy may have ended their lives, their courage gave birth to a legacy that refuses to die, a legacy beyond time. Today, when one visits the archives of the National Bravery Awards, the names Geeta Chopra and Sanjay Chopra appear at the very top, not as recipients, but as reasons. The plaques beside their portraits read simply, "In memory of two children whose courage inspired a nation." The simplicity of that inscription says everything. Their story does not need embellishment. It speaks through silence, through remembrance, through every life touched by its lessons. As India continues to grow and evolve, facing new challenges and triumphs, the story of the Chopra siblings endures like an echo through time, a haunting yet hopeful reminder that even the smallest lives can leave the greatest mark on history, because in the end, justice was not only served in the courtroom, it was served in the hearts of millions who learned that love, courage, and memory can outlast even the darkest acts of cruelty. And so, in the city where it all began, under the same skies that once watched over two young dreamers walking toward a radio station, their story still lingers, whispering through the breeze of Delhi's evenings. We are gone, but we are not forgotten. The eternal reminder, in the crowded lanes of New Delhi, where modern life moves at a dizzying pace, very few stories manage to pierce the haze of forgetfulness. But the story of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra endures, whispered in schools, remembered in police academies, and honored in parades. It is not merely the story of two children, but of a nation's moral awakening, a reminder that the safety and dignity of its youngest citizens must never be compromised. The passage of time has not lessened the ache that their names carry. Instead, it has turned their memory into something sacred, a symbol of innocence that demands protection, and a lesson passed quietly from one generation to the next. Every so often, when cases of violence or child endangerment make headlines, reporters inevitably mention that as if invoking their story is a way to demand better, to remind society of the moment it collectively promised. Never again. The human cost of justice. The execution of Ranga and Bila in 1982 was met with mixed emotions for many. It was a necessary conclusion, the ultimate expression of justice for crimes too heinous to forgive. The sight of their names being struck from the prison rolls was seen as the restoration of moral order. Yet, for others, particularly philosophers, legal scholars, and activists, the event sparked a debate that lingers even today. Can justice truly heal a wound born of such cruelty? Captain Chopra never attended the execution when asked why. He said quietly, "My children are not coming back. Watching someone die will not bring them peace. Nor me." His words revealed something profound, that real justice cannot be measured only in punishment, but in prevention, awareness, and collective empathy. The Chopra case ultimately became more than a crime story. It became a mirror, reflecting both the strengths and shortcomings of a society, still learning to balance its hunger for justice with its need for compassion. The public awakening. In the late 1970s, mass media in India was still in its infancy. Newspapers, radio, and word of mouth were the lifelines of communication. The Chopra case changed that for the first time. The press united across political lines to demand accountability from law enforcement, and the government headlines screamed justice for Geeta and Sanjay, and editorials urged for reforms in the way crimes against children were investigated and prosecuted. Ordinary citizens, from small towns to major cities, joined the movement, writing petitions, attending vigils, and holding public rallies. The outcry was unlike anything India had witnessed in the post-emergency era. The case, in a way, became the country's moral reset button, forcing both citizens and leaders to confront the dark corners of neglect that had allowed such horrors to happen. This was no longer about one family's grief. It was about reclaiming humanity's seeds of change within a few years. The impact of the case began to take shape in tangible ways. Educational boards introduced awareness modules in schools, teaching children basic safety practices, how to identify danger, and when to seek help. Police departments started integrating early forms of missing person protocols. Cinema and literature began reflecting this shift. Films like Ankish, 1986, and Damini, 1993, carried echoes of the nation's evolving moral consciousness, shaped in part by the outcry following the Chopra tragedy. These cultural ripples built momentum that eventually contributed to India's later legislative frameworks on child protection. Thus, even in death, the siblings became reformers. From tragedy to teaching, many of India's schools, both public and private, still tell the story of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra during annual bravery events. Teachers recount the events not to instill fear, but to emphasize awareness, empathy, and civic duty. One Delhi teacher, interviewed in 2019 for a local newspaper, shared a striking reflection. "Every time I tell my students about Geeta and Sanjay, I watch their faces change. They start to understand that bravery doesn't only mean fighting villains. It means being aware, being kind, and standing up for others." This transformation of tragedy into moral education remains one of the most powerful legacies of the case. It allowed the nation to turn pain into principle and grief into guidance. The unseen ripples. In 2008, during the 30th anniversary of the tragedy, a memorial event was quietly held at the Indian Navy Officers' Mess. The attendees included retired officers, teachers, journalists, and a few children who had received the Chopra Bravery Awards. The highlight of the evening came when one of the awardees, a 13-year-old girl from Madhya Pradesh, stood before the crowd and said, "I never met Geeta or Sanjay, but I feel like I know them when I got this medal. I promised myself to live bravely." Like they would have. Her words moved the audience to tears. Captain Chopra, frail but dignified, smiled faintly and whispered, "Then they have truly lived." It was perhaps the most meaningful tribute, proof that even across generations, the spirit of two lost children could continue to shape the hearts of the living. A nation learns empathy. The Chopra case didn't only expose flaws in the justice system, it revealed how society itself needed to change. In 1978, conversations about violence, especially against minors, were often cloaked in silence. Families preferred discretion over discussion, fear over awareness. But after the Chopra's tragedy, silence was no longer an option. The case forced open public dialogue about child safety, the importance of psychological counseling, and the role of bystanders in preventing crime. In a sense, Geeta and Sanjay taught India to talk, to confront discomfort, to demand transparency, generational memory. As decades passed, the faces of Ranga and Bila faded from the public's mind, but Geeta and Sanjay remained luminous. Their story evolved from a news report into a moral parable told through textbooks, documentaries, and the whispers of elders who had lived through that time. Younger generations, born long after the 1970s, might not remember the details, but they know the names in Delhi. A quiet memorial plaque near Dalakwan bears their images, youthful, smiling, unaware of what fate had in store. Passers-by often stopped to read the inscription, moved by the simplicity of it. Some leave flowers, others leave silence. Both are forms of remembrance, justice, and the passage of time. Over the years, various courts revisited the Chopra case in legal studies and discussions about capital punishment. It became a reference point in the Supreme Court's 1983 judgment defining the rarest of rare doctrine, the guideline for when the death penalty could be applied. Geeta and Sanjay's tragedy not only defined moral outrage but also legal philosophy. It helped establish frameworks that ensured capital punishment was reserved only for crimes that shocked the collective conscience of society, precisely like theirs did. This intersection between law and emotion showed how human stories can shape the course of justice, often more effectively than any statute. The unwritten legacy beyond all the visible tributes, the awards, the plaques, the broadcasts, there is another legacy, quieter but perhaps more powerful. The moral restraint of a society that remembers age, time. An act of violence shakes the country. Journalists and citizens alike recall the Chopras not to reopen wounds, but to measure how far India has come since that night. The case serves as a moral compass, a reminder that justice is not merely about punishment, but about empathy, prevention, and awareness. And somewhere in that quiet understanding lies their greatest triumph, the eternal children, in the archives of All India Radio. Among old reels and dusty scripts, one folder remains marked, Yuvani Program, August 1978. Inside is a copy of the schedule, where Geeta and Sanjay's names were written in neat handwriting. Underlined in red, their segment was titled, Youth and the Future of India. They never arrived to record it yet. In an unexplainable way, they fulfilled its promise. They became the youth who shaped the future, not through words spoken into a microphone, but through the enduring echo of their lives. If that program had aired, it might have lasted an hour instead. Their message has lasted for generations. The final note there are moments in history when tragedy transcends itself, when grief transforms into legacy, and loss becomes light. The story of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra is one such moment. Their names no longer evoke only sorrow. They inspire duty. Their absence no longer feels like silence. It feels like purpose. Through every young hero honored in their memory, through every law strengthened in their name, and through every child taught to be aware and brave, their spirits live on. And perhaps that is the truest form of immortality, not one written in marble or sung in songs, but one etched quietly into the conscience of a nation that refuses to forget. Because even as time races forward and generations change, there are still two young voices, pure, full of promise, echoing through India's heart. We were meant to speak for the youth of our country now. Through you, we still do the weight of memory. Decades after that dark August evening, Delhi has changed beyond recognition. The skyline now glitters with glass towers. Flyovers stretch across the Yamuna, and digital billboards flash endlessly. Yet, if you pause in certain corners around Dalakwan, near the naval housing complexes, or along the old ring road, the air still seems to carry a faint trace of that era's silence. Those who lived through it often say they can still recall the tension that blanketed the city after the Chopra children went missing. Memory, in this case, is not just remembrance, it is an inheritance. Each generation inherits both the pain and the lesson, and even now, among families who once lived in Delhi in the 1970s. The story of Geeta and Sanjay is told not as horror, but as duty. You must be careful, you must be aware. You must never forget what happened to those children. It is this human passing of memory, more than any official award or archive, that keeps their story alive. Captain Chopra's quiet crusade after the executions. Captain Maiden Mohan Chopra withdrew from the public eye for a time. Friends described him as a man of quiet discipline. Grief never left him, but neither did his strength for years. He visited schools across Delhi and nearby states, speaking about vigilance, safety, and community awareness. He refused to let his children's deaths be defined by tragedy alone. They were brave. He would say, let the world remember them that way eventually. He worked with the Indian Council for Child Welfare to formalize the bravery awards that bore their names every year. When young recipients stood before him on Republic Day, wearing medals engraved with the Geeta Chopra Award or the Sanjay Chopra Award, he would shake their hands with quiet pride to the children. He was not just a retired officer. He was a father who had turned heartbreak into honor in his final years. He rarely spoke publicly, but one recorded interview, preserved by Doordarshan in the late 1990s, captures his essence. When asked what justice meant to him now, he said softly, "Justice is when no parent must go through what we went through. That's all I ever wanted." The psychology of a nation wounded. The 1970s were not gentle years for India. The emergency had just ended. Trust in authority was brittle. The Chopra case reawakened a deeper anxiety. If even the children of a respected naval officer could vanish from a safe neighborhood, who was truly safe? Sociologists studying post-emergency India often cite the case as a turning point in public consciousness. It changed how Indians perceived urban danger, strangers, and police response. Before 1978, many parents let their children travel short distances alone, assuming goodwill and community safety. After the Chopras, that innocence ended. The word kidnapping took on a darker tone. The idea of never talking to strangers became an unspoken rule in Indian homes. The case, in its own tragic way, redefined urban childhood, teaching an entire generation that vigilance was not fear, but survival. The case in law and academia. In India's legal circles, the Rangabilla case remains one of the earliest precedents in discussions on the rarest of rare doctrine, the standard for awarding the death penalty in India. Legal textbooks still cite it when explaining how public outrage and moral conscience can influence sentencing. But the case's significance extends beyond law. It's studied in psychology, criminology, and media ethics programs across universities. Students analyze how media coverage shaped the investigation, how radio announcements, police sketches, and public mobilization all came together to pressure authorities into swift action. In 2018, the National Law University of Delhi even hosted a panel marking the 40th anniversary of the case. One speaker remarked, "The Chopras taught India that justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done." Those words echo through time, a fitting epitaph for a case that forced both courts and citizens to confront the moral limits of humanity. In art and culture, as years passed, artists and filmmakers began to reinterpret the tragedy through their own lenses. While no mainstream film directly recreated the ordeal, out of respect for the family's wishes, its influence can be felt in countless works that explore innocence, trust, and loss. Poets wrote verses titled "Two Stars Over Delhi." Painters depicted twin figures walking into light. Playwrights wove echoes of their story into allegories about hope and justice. One particularly haunting sculpture, displayed briefly in the National Gallery of Modern Art, showed two children carved from white marble, facing away from the viewer, their hands almost touching the artist. When asked who they represented, simply said, "All the children we failed to protect." The Chopra siblings became not just figures in history, but symbols in art. reminders of both fragility and courage. A story retold by time. Each generation reinterprets the Chopra story through its own lens. For those who lived through 1978, it was a crime story, a national shock. For those born in the 1990s and 2000s, it became a moral legend, a parable of bravery. Today, in the age of social media and instant news, their story resurfaces in new forms: digital documentaries, student essays, online tributes. But amid all the essence remains the same: a nation's promise never to let innocence be devoured by cruelty again. That is said that true legacy is not built from monuments, but from conversations that never end. The Chopra story lives in such conversations, passed down quietly, never forgotten. The moral compass of modern India. Every January 26th, during the Republic Day parade, the names of the Chopra Bravery Award recipients are announced among the cheering crowds, television cameras, and proud parents. Few pause to consider the origin of those two names etched in history, but the medals gleam not just with metal, they gleam with memory. For each boy who receives the Sanjay Chopra Award, it is a reminder that bravery is not just physical strength, but moral clarity. For each girl who receives the Geeta Chopra Award, it is a declaration that courage knows no gender, that even in the face of terror, dignity can prevail. This quiet, annual ceremony transforms national tragedy into collective healing, a ritual of remembrance dressed in honor and pride. A father's legacy, the nation's promise. In the early 2000s, when Captain Chopra's health began to decline, he often sat by the framed photographs of Geeta and Sanjay. The photos, once vivid, had begun to fade slightly, the edges curling, the ink softening, yet their smiles remained undimmed. Visitors who came to see him said he spoke little of pain. Instead, he asked about the children who had won bravery awards that year, where they came from, what acts they had done in those questions lay the quiet victory of a father who had refused to let grief define him. His life had become an act of defiance, a refusal to let cruelty have the final word. He passed away, surrounded by those photographs, leaving behind not only a memory, but a message that hope, when nurtured through purpose, can outlive despair. A story that refuses to fade. More than 4 decades later, the Chopra siblings remain part of India's moral DNA. Their story appears in documentaries, public service announcements, and history exhibits. Delhi police officers still refer to their case when training recruits on the urgency of missing child reports, and every so often, an old headline resurfaces: grainy photos, stark black print. The words "the Chopra case shocks the nation." Yet now, when people read it, they don't just think of what was lost, they think of what was built: awareness, reform, courage. It's the rare case where tragedy didn't end with mourning. It evolved into movement and innocence immortalized in the end. The story of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra is not one of defeat, it is a story of transformation, of how two children who never made it to their radio program became the eternal voice of India's youth. They taught a generation what it means to care, to speak up, to remember. Their absence became presence, their silence a call to action in a country that often forgets too soon. The Chopra siblings remain unforgettable. Their names are written not just in awards and archives, but in the collective conscience of a people who learned, through unbearable pain, the meaning of moral responsibility. And so, long after the headlines have yellowed and the case files gathered dust, two young souls walk forever through the heart of India, hand in hand, shining quietly in the nation's moral night sky. The night before justice, it was February 1982, a cold winter night in Tihor jail, New Delhi. Inside one of the dimly lit cells, two men sat in silence, Ranga and Bila, for years. Their names had evoked rage in every corner of the nation. Posters had carried their faces, newspapers had chronicled every appeal, every delay, and now, at the end of all those legal battles, there was nothing left but time and the ticking of a clock that counted down their final hours. Reports from prison staff later revealed that both men had shown little emotion in their final days. They spoke little, ate sporadically, and spent most of their time staring at the wall or the narrow window that opened toward a gray courtyard. Yet, even in those final hours, their arrogance had not completely vanished, one jail officer recalled. That Ranga smirked when told the hangman had arrived. "Let's see if your rope is as strong as your law," he muttered. But when dawn came, when footsteps echoed through the hall and the keys turned in their locks, both men grew pale. No more smirks, no more defiance, only silence. At 6 a.m., the two were led to the gallows. A small group of officials and doctors stood witness, including a magistrate who read out the death warrant signed by the President of India. The rope was adjusted, the hood was drawn in. With one sharp pull of the lever, it ended. It was over in seconds. But for millions, it marked the close of 4 long, bitter years of outrage, grief, and fear. Delhi wakes to news of the execution. When word spread across Delhi that Ranga and Bila had been hanged, the city responded with a strange mixture of relief and solemnity. Crowds gathered outside newspaper offices and radio stations, quietly exchanging the news. There were no loud celebrations, no cheers, just the subdued satisfaction of knowing that justice, however delayed, had arrived for Captain Chopra. The news brought no joy, only closure. When a reporter asked him for a statement, he replied simply, "Justice is not vengeance, it is peace, and peace, I pray, may finally visit my home." He never spoke of the two men. Again, the eternal photograph in the Chopra residence. The same framed photograph of Geeta and Sanjay hung in the drawing room. The siblings stood side by side in their school uniforms, smiling, Sanjay's arm draped casually around his sister's shoulder. Visitors often said it felt as though the photograph itself glowed faintly, as if lit by something other than sunlight. Perhaps it was love, or memory refusing to fade. Every morning, Captain Chopra would stand before it for a few seconds, not in prayer, not in sorrow, but in silent dialogue. It was said, he sometimes whispered, mission complete for him. His children's story was no longer one of tragedy, it was a lesson. A Bikan Delhi learns to remember. By the mid-1980s, Delhi had begun to move on, but something subtle had changed. Parents became more cautious, schools implemented escort policies, All India Radio introduced safety awareness programs, and the name Chopra had become shorthand for a national promise. Never again. The government formally institutionalized the National Bravery Awards, which would henceforth include 2 special medals in honor of Geeta and Sanjay Chopra every January. As Republic Day approached, school children from across India arrived in Delhi. Young heroes who had saved lives, averted tragedies, or acted selflessly in the face of danger. They were treated as guests of the nation, given new clothes, taken on tours of the capital, and on the morning of the Republic Day parade, they stood proudly beside the president, their medals gleaming in the sunlight. The ceremony always paused briefly when the names Sanjay Chopra and Geeta Chopra were mentioned. It was as if time itself held its breath in respect. The children who followed each year brought new stories of a boy who saved his sister from drowning, a girl who stopped a bus hijacking, a teenager who rescued neighbors from a burning house, and each time the medal was pinned, the announcer would say, the Sanjay Chopra Award for Bravery, the Geeta Chopra Award for Bravery. And in that moment, Geeta and Sanjay were reborn again, not as victims, but as symbols of strength. Generations of young Indians grew up hearing their names to them. The Chopra siblings weren't faces from an old newspaper. They were ideals, proof that even in the darkest moments, courage can shine. Captain Chopra's final years. As the years wore on, Captain Chopra grew frail, but his mind remained sharp. He continued attending the Bravery Award ceremonies well into his 70s. He'd often request to meet the children personally afterward, not for interviews, not for publicity, but to ask them one question. When you were afraid, what made you still do the right thing? And when they answered, he would smile. He once told a journalist, "That's the answer my children would have given to when he passed away." The Indian Navy gave him a quiet, dignified farewell. His coffin, draped in the tricolor, was placed beside a simple wooden frame containing the photos of Geeta. In Sanjay there was no grandeur, no headlines, just the steady sound of the bugle, and a father reunited, at last, with the children he had lost the meaning of courage. Over time, the Chopra case became a mirror through which India examined its conscience. It forced difficult questions. How do we protect innocence in a society that is changing faster than it can safeguard itself? How do we ensure that justice remains human, not mechanical? And how do we turn pain into progress, rather than letting it decay into bitterness? In many ways, the answers came from the Chopras themselves. Their story taught that bravery was not the absence of fear. It was the ability to stand firm, despite it. Their legacy shaped countless reforms, from school transport, safety to improved emergency response systems. Even today, police cadets study the investigation as a lesson in both failure and redemption. The story retold by the 2000s, filmmakers and writers began to revisit the case carefully. Respectfully, documentaries were produced. Essays written, each generation interpreted it. One short film, The Radio Show That Never Aired, depicted Geeta and Sanjay walking down the rain-soaked road toward All India Radio. It ends with them stepping into a glowing mist, as if they were crossing from one world into another. No violence, no gore, just the echo of their laughter fading into the sound of a radio broadcast beginning. The film's closing line, narrated in Geeta's voice, was taken from a real diary entry found later by her parents. "When I speak, I hope it helps someone." That simple sentence became a haunting reminder that their voices, silenced too soon, still speak through the acts of every child who dares to be brave. The eternal walks. People visiting Delhi's older neighborhoods still say they've seen something strange near the Dalakwan roundabout late at night. Two figures walking side by side, a teenage girl and a boy, talking softly, laughing as if heading to a place they've long been waiting to reach. No one ever sees where they go. The road curves, the mist thickens, and they vanish. Locals call it a superstition, but perhaps it's not a haunting. Perhaps it's a promise that innocence never truly dies. It just walks quietly beside us, reminding us to keep our humanity intact. A nation remembers every Republic Day, when the parade begins and the children stand tall on Rajpath. The commentator reads out the names of the awardees. Crowd cheers the soldiers' salute, and somewhere, perhaps unseen but deeply felt, two young souls smile because their story, once written in grief, has become a story of hope. It is said that every nation is defined not only by its victories, but by how it mourns its children. In that sense, India's heart will forever carry the names Geeta and Sanjay carved, not in stone, but in conscience. And though time will continue to move forward, their story remains what it always was, a message to every parent, every child, every citizen, that courage, love, and remembrance can turn even the darkest night into dawn. Some lights don't fade when the candles burn out. They become stars. In Geeta and Sanjay Chopra, they are two of the brightest,